Hello, and welcome to this edition of Reading the Bible with Meaning in our study from the New Testament book of Revelation. We are going to look at just the first 11 verses of Revelation chapter 2. We'll be starting into the section that's called the letters to the seven churches. So, 7 letters that are contained in chapters 2 and 3. I would encourage you to have a Bible open in front of you. I'm using the English Standard Version. You can certainly look at whatever version you like. If you have access, if you have an ESV, if you don't, and have access to the internet on another device, or perhaps the one you're using, you can go to Bible Gateway and you can read the translation there. But we're going to walk through this together, a piece of a verse at a time. So our last study was an introduction to Revelation as a whole, our first study, and then our next study took us through chapter 1 of Revelation. That actually took me 2 times to get through at the live class that I'm doing, but this one is what I covered in the live class for this week. So Revelation 2, verses 1 through 11. Let's start with an introduction to the 7 letters. So in chapters 2 and 3, we have brief letters to the churches of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And the letters are important because they provide a glimpse into the struggle the church faced in the late 2nd century as they sought to live faithfully in a hostile environment. So the letters give us historical context as well as a framework for interpreting the rest of Revelation. Now, I want you to understand as we walk through this what my perspective is on these letters. These are letters intended for each of the churches, but every church was supposed to read every letter, and there's an important reason for that. I don't think there's anything symbolic beyond that these are actual letters. They don't predict 7 ages of the church. They don't do anything beyond what they appear to do. Okay, now we have to look at the specific circumstances in which Christians in Asia Minor in the closing decade of the 1st century found themselves. Okay, a hostile environment for Christians. The symbolic language of Revelation makes it hard to determine a precise date of composition based on content. We talked about this, I think, in the introduction. But Irenaeus placed it in the reign of Domitian, probably in or just before AD 95. And the reason we kind of grab onto that date is because we know that at that moment in the reign of Domitian, emperor worship was mandatory. And again, it was more of a political than a religious statement. Rome looked at it more as a political statement of loyalty. The church and Judaism looked at it as a religious act because of what was involved. Swearing loyalty to the emperor as King of Kings and Lord of Lords above any other king or lord. Neither the Jews nor the Christians could in good conscience do that. Okay, we have to remember that we're dealing with a situation, we're dealing with a political situation in which there is no separation of church and state. People would worship the emperor as a matter of course, and especially when it was considered to be a mandatory statement. But a lot of them probably didn't give it any credence, any thought beyond this is what I have to do as a citizen of Rome, like paying taxes. Okay, but emperor worship seems to have developed over time in the religion of Rome. It was an assimilation of customs and beliefs brought into the empire from Eastern cultures, particularly Egypt. Egypt was big on worshiping the pharaohs, and the pharaohs, they would claim divine status. They would claim, and they would tweak their genealogies, and perhaps some of the emperors did as well, tweak their genealogies to make it look like they were descended from gods or demigods. And so that gives them their sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? Their sense of divinity, their sense of being a god. And so that played into it. Now, it's interesting. It's good to look at the Roman emperors of the first century. So I made this handy chart. On the left side of the chart, you see listed the emperors who are called the Judeo-Claudian emperors. They all connected themselves in some way to Julius Caesar by adoption. Okay, there are some bloodlines tied together in there, but Augustus adopted Tiberius, who was the son of his second wife Livia. Okay, he wasn't a blood relative. Caligula also was a nephew of Tiberius. Claudius was related to Caligula, okay? But again, no bloodline there. And Claudius wasn't even Caligula's designated successor. Claudius was made emperor by the Roman army or the Praetorian Guard. Nero was the son of Claudius's fourth wife, his last wife. And he was more or less designated to rule after Claudius, along with Claudius's son. But Claudius's son didn't survive that, okay? So, and then when Nero died, the whole thing was thrown into confusion, and four emperors in turn vied for the throne. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, they all were generals, and they vied for rule, but didn't survive it. And then Vespasian came to the throne. He was elected, if you will, or appointed by the Senate, and he took over. And Vespasian started a little bit of a dynasty. Vespasian, his son Titus, and then his son Domitian took over. And he's the one we're looking at. That's when things began to go off the rails in terms of emperor worship. And then Nerva and Trajan fill out the last of the first century. So as we move into that latter part of the first century, it was vital to understand that this is what's going on. You have emperors who want to make sure that people think that they are divine. Okay, a little pause there while I was taking care of a little bit of unexpected background noise. So anyway, those are the emperors. So that's okay. That's where we're going to go with that. Now, again, we're dealing with emperors who sought unity in their empire. Now, again, the phenomenon of emperor worship was known, but didn't play a big part in Roman culture and belief until Augustus, who was really the first of the Judeo-Claudian emperors. Julius Caesar was not an emperor, although he clearly had aspirations to that, but he was assassinated before he could take it on. Now, Augustus comes to the throne, and he's really not into the whole emperor worship thing. He did allow temples in the east to be built to him, built to the divine Caesar in the eastern provinces. And most likely those temples focused on worship of Julius Caesar, who was deified, okay, elected to be a god. And so Augustus permitted Roman citizens to worship Julius Caesar, but did not encourage Western parts of the empire to worship him while he was alive. So he was deified later when he died, and emperor worship was sporadically promoted. Tiberius actively discouraged it, but Caligula famously seems to have promoted it and indeed insisted on it while he was alive. And his response to rebellion amongst the Jewish provinces was to order his image to be placed in the temple in Jerusalem as an object of worship. But he was assassinated before the order could be carried out. And so a major crisis in that region was averted. Claudius discouraged emperor worship. He was highly educated. He knew that was a bunch of nonsense, didn't want to deal with it. Nero, Vespasian, and Titus had other problems to worry about, so they didn't encourage it or discourage it. Domitian comes to the throne, and he openly embraces the notion that he is divine and made it a crime, okay, to not accord him divine honors, okay, to accord him some respect as a divine leader. And if you fail to accord him those divine honors, you were either executed or banished. If you were a Roman citizen, you were banished, especially if you were high up in the hierarchy. If you weren't, you were executed. And that's what happened to Christians sporadically. Okay, now that's the background. Each letter follows a discernible pattern. And again, the letters, and we'll see this as we start to walk through them, the letters are meant to be read together, read as a unit. And that's because the one who is addressing the churches is referred to using symbolism out of chapter 1 from the description of the risen Lord. Okay? So my view is that the entire book of Revelation is really a letter, an encyclical letter sent to the seven of the major churches in Asia Minor. An encyclical because it's meant to be circulated. Okay, that's what an encyclical letter is. So landing in these cities, the letter would be copied and dispersed to daughter churches. Okay. And the whole book is intended to be read aloud in its entirety to grasp what it's saying. So each community needed to hear what was happening in the larger church so they could pray for one another and encourage one another in the face of coming persecution, because things got worse as they moved on. So each letter begins with an address to the angel of the church in. And some see that as an allusion to the bishop or pastor of the local church. Now, it could also represent a supernatural messenger, somebody taking this message to the church on behalf of God. Because that's the root meaning of the Greek word translated angel, messenger. Okay? So this divine messenger is meant to help the church understand what's being written. And then the address to the angel of the church in, again, is followed by some imagery from the vision of Christ recorded in Revelation 1, 9 through 20. So to the angel of the church in Ephesus, okay, write. And that's how it starts. Now, Ephesus is the first letter. And if you look at a map of the 7 churches, look at a map of Asia Minor during this time, Ephesus is the closest major city to the Isle of Patmos, where John is in exile. Okay, it's also not by happenstance, also happens to be the capital of Roman Asia and the most important commercial city in the region. Ephesus is closely associated with the author of Revelation. Okay, he spent time there. Back in history, Ephesus was part of the kingdom of Pergamum, bequeathed to Rome by the Greek king Attalus III in his will in 133 BC. So it became a Roman province early on and was loyal and faithful and paid their taxes on time. So Augustus granted Ephesus the right of self-government in 27 BC. It meant that they could control their own governmental affairs without a procurator or a governor being appointed by Rome. All they had to do was keep the peace and pay their taxes. So Ephesus, being an important commercial city, was highly populated. This is the age of cities. And so there's a population of more than 125,000 people in New Testament times. A large community of Christians and Jews, no doubt. 3 great trade routes converged at the city. And, you have to entertain people. So there's a major stadium, a market, and a 25,000-seat theater, which doesn't sound like a lot to us today, but that's huge for ancient times. Now, Ephesus was also the home to temples, many temples, one of which was the Temple of Artemis, or Diana in Latin, the goddess of the hunt. And legend tells us, history tells us, that it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So a huge, huge temple, the center really of the city. 425 feet long, 220 feet wide, 60 feet high, 4 times the size of the Parthenon. Okay, so a huge place. Now we know some things about the cult of Artemis in Ephesus. It was associated with trees. Okay, we see that on coins dedicated to Artemis or Diana. And another thing that's important, and you go, why do I need to know this? Well, you need to know this because it provides context for the letter to the church in Ephesus. Every shrine or temple in the city was considered a place of sanctuary, a place where those who believed they'd been falsely accused of a crime could go and seek refuge so they wouldn't be killed, and they would await trial. And that sacred enclosure in each temple was called the paradisos. Okay, same word used in the Greek translation of Genesis to refer to the Garden of Eden, the paradise. Okay, now Christianity arrived in Ephesus fairly early, as early as 52 A.D. And Paul visited the city. He left Aquila and Priscilla there on his way to Corinth. We learn about that in Acts chapter 18. So it's an early church. Paul spent 2 years in the city, and Timothy spent time actively ministering there as well. Okay, so very important to understand what exactly we're talking about when we talk about the church in Ephesus, a church that was founded strong, okay, with apostolic help. Okay, all right, so let's look at the letter itself. The first sentence is the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Okay, so if you recall the description that we have of Jesus from Revelation 1, you know that this alludes to that description. The one who walks among holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among, okay, the 7 golden lampstands. And if you recall, what we're talking about here is Jesus being present to the church. The right hand is the hand of power in the ancient world. So when it says he holds the stars in his right hand, it symbols control or power over his church and also protection. Okay? Walks among the 7 golden lampstands is a statement that affirms that Christ is present in his churches and aware of their activities. He is a present Savior, not a distant God. Okay? So that's all I think extremely important to understand as we walk into this. Now, walking among the 7 golden lampstands may be an allusion to Leviticus 26:12, where God says, I will walk among you and will be your God, and you shall be my people. Now, that's not talking about literal physical walking around or walking with, but that God's presence will dwell with his people. Okay, so that's the meaning of this in Revelation 2 in the first verse. Jesus says, I know you, I'm with you, I'm aware of what's going on in your church. And that's revealed then in verse 2, which begins, I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance. I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance. Okay, those are all important words. The word works refers to the overall work of the Christian life in all its aspects. Okay, so what's being talked about here is that your actions, your works, are really a demonstration of your beliefs, what you believe. Your faith should issue forth in works, because works are the evidence of what's going on in your heart. And the word toil, again, is the action, the work of the church, preaching, teaching, helping one another. All the things we see described in the first few chapters of Acts, what the church is doing. Okay, preaching the word, teaching one another about Jesus, helping one another in times of need. The word patience is an important word in Revelation. It's passive here, so it refers to things inflicted upon. Patience in affliction is the idea. Okay, the faithful endurance of the church in face of opposition, false teaching, and persecution. Because one of the things we're going to see as we walk through all of these letters is that opposition is coming from outside, but also from inside. Okay, outside and inside. Okay, and so the church has to endure both kinds of attacks, and this is interesting. And he says, I know your works, your toil and your patient endurance, and how you cannot bear with those who are evil. The phrasing here, okay, indicates internal problems in the church because we haven't started talking about the outside stuff. Evil, right? What is that, right? So it's things that run contrary to the gospel, contrary to the teachings of the apostles. And these are false teachers. The next phrase reveals that. But have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not. I find that interesting. Who call themselves apostles and are not. It's important to think about the apostolic office in the early church. And again, some familiarity with Acts of the Apostles, helps us figure that out. The apostles, their responsibility, their role in the church was to preach and teach. Okay? They're the ones who were closest to Jesus, who spent the most time with him, so they are charged with teaching others about Jesus. Now remember, we're in 95-ish AD. John, the writer of Revelation, was alive in the time of Jesus, one of his youngest disciples, or one of the youngest apostles, one of his youngest disciples. It's not hard to imagine that there were other people his age who also had encountered Jesus during his earthly ministry and show up claiming apostolic credentials, claiming to have received a message from Jesus that differs from what the true apostles are teaching. Now you go into a Greek city like Asia Minor, who's going to know, right? So they make these claims. These itinerant preachers and teachers come in and they say, well, we're more important. We walk with Jesus. We know more than these people who have been appointed over you, because the apostles didn't stay put very long. They're off doing what they got to do. And again, a problem predominantly in non-Jewish areas, because they can come in and they can preach something contrary, right, to the underpinnings of Judaism and Christianity, and suggest things that aren't really true. So you have legalists on one side and antinomians on the other. What's an antinomian? So glad you asked. Get to that in a second. But have tested those who call themselves an apostles and are not, right? So antinomian, from the Latin anti and the Greek nomos, anti-law. So these are teachers who are teaching that Christians are freed from obeying the law by virtue of grace. Now, when we think of the law, right, we think of the Ten Commandments, we think of all the laws that go with it. But understand what they're saying here. What they're saying is that Christians, anyone who comes to faith in Christ and has received the gift of grace through baptism, is no longer bound to demonstrate his or her faith by his or her actions. So the most extreme form of this taught that once I've come to faith in Christ, once I've come to an understanding of Christ, okay, and received him and received his grace, I'm no longer bound by any law. Okay? So I can do whatever I want. The other extreme is legalism. And legalists, sometimes called Judaizers, they came in and they taught that, yes, you need Jesus for salvation, but you need Jesus plus obedience to Torah. Okay? You must be circumcised to be saved. Well, and there's merit to that only in the sense that Jesus really didn't have a problem with the law so much as he had a problem with how the law was being taught and applied. Okay? So the verse closes, right? Verse 3 closes with the sentence that began in verse 1, long sentence. And the repetition may indicate that this is a recent chapter in the life of the church. I know you are enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake and have not grown weary. Okay? You are enduring patiently, bearing up, have not grown weary. This is how we close the sentence in verse 3. So this is what Jesus knows about the church. They're enduring patiently, they're bearing up, they have not grown weary, they're doing all the things that they are supposed to do as a church. But there's still a problem, okay? And I think one of the larger lessons in this is that there is never a point in the Christian life or in the life of the church where we achieve perfection, where we get exactly to where we need to be. It's always a journey. Okay? So having praised the church, now we move to a moment of censure. Verse 4. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Okay, the Greek word for love, there's 4 words in Greek for love, talking about different kinds of love. Okay, to illustrate, I can say I love chocolate and I love my wife. Those should be different kinds of love. Okay, agape love, that's the word agape. Agape love is the word used to describe God's love for us. It's a love that chooses, okay? A love demonstrated in action, not just in emotion, okay? And so he says, you have abandoned the agape, the love you had at first. And that statement is sandwiched between one about intolerance for those who are evil in verse 2 and hatred of a group referred to as the Nicolaitans. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, it may indicate that the desire for doctrinal truth had superseded sharing God's love with the lost. So they're more important about being right than doing the right thing. Okay, more important, doctrine has become more important than living out their faith. And so they're working really hard to combat what's called heresy, so false doctrine, false beliefs. They're working very hard to combat that, but really not working on redeeming people, bringing people into the fold, okay, bringing people to Christ. So that's a problem. And Jesus says, remember therefore from where you have fallen, repent, okay, remember. Now, remembering is a present imperative, continuing action. So always be remembering, therefore, would be a great way to phrase that. Always be remembering, therefore, where you have from where you have fallen. Think back to what you were in the earliest days of the church. Think about where you were in the earliest days after your conversion. Okay? When everybody was excited and trying to make things happen the way they were supposed to happen. Then he says, repent. And repent is in the aorist imperative, and that means a decisive break with the past, right? That means forget about it, leave it behind, don't focus on it, don't do what you did, don't do what you were doing, make it part of the past. So what this is saying there, remember therefore from where you have fallen, repent, it's a command to take concrete action. Do something about it, okay? Why? Here's the warning. If not, I will come and remove your lampstand from its place. I will come and remove your lampstand from its place. Ooh, okay? Jesus is saying that as a church, you will not exist anymore if you don't do what you are supposed to do, okay? And the warning even this is Jesus, I will come. I will visit you. Okay? This implies that there is something deeply wrong with the state of the church. Though it's doing the thing it's supposed to do, it's not being the church. Because they're focused more on doctrine than on right living, focusing on how that gospel should affect their lives. The work they're carrying on is in jeopardy. Okay? Now, good thing, in verse 6, yet this you have, you hate the work of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Who are the Nicolaitans? Okay? The short answer is we're not really sure. Okay? But they'll come up again in the letter to Pergamum in connection with eating food sacrificed to idols. And that's going to suggest a connection with the followers of Jezebel in Thyatira who advocated the same practice. And we'll unpack that when we get to the letter. But early tradition identified the Nicolaitans with Nicholas, one of the first deacons of the church. And if that's true, that's sad. That's very sad. On the one hand, if it is Nicholas who started this, then there's credibility to the movement because he's one of the originals. But it's also tragic because he's fallen away. Okay, he's fallen away. And what the Nicolaitan movement, if we take all these clues, what it may likely have been is among a group of people that Paul referred to in the Corinthian letters as super spirituals, okay? People who believed that their faith was so strong, okay, that they could do things that would be regarded as wrong and not have it impact them spiritually. So the best way to understand this is to think about what goes on in temples in the ancient world. This would be true even of Judaism pre-70 AD when there was still a temple. So some sacrifices were carried out in such a way that only the most valuable parts of the animal were burned in sacrifice. So the inner organs, the fat, things like that. And what remained was consumed as part of a ritual meal. We know that in the non-Christian, non-Jewish situations, right, like the temple to Artemis, the extra meat, if it wasn't consumed right away, was sold in the marketplace for people to buy. Now, here's the problem. In the ancient world, if even part of that animal was offered in sacrifice, there was a sense in which the animal was touched by that god. So in a way, spiritually contaminated, so that eating the meat was almost a way of acknowledging the existence of that God and tangentially engaging in an act of worship. Jews wouldn't do it. Christians wouldn't do it either. There were some Christians who said that God doesn't exist, therefore the sacrifice is meaningless and the meat's okay to eat. Paul said, yeah, that's true in a technical sense, but what about the people who struggle with that? Is it really that important to you to eat this meat when other options are available if doing so leads weaker believers astray? Okay, that's 1 Corinthians 8. Problem is that it leads to compromise. And where do you draw the line? Okay, where do you draw the line? If I can compromise in this place, does that mean I can compromise when it comes to doing the act of worship to the emperor, okay, which is only a political act? But where do you stop? And so you start, once you start down that slope, it's almost impossible to stop. And pretty soon you've compromised your entire faith, okay? The violation of the apostolic decree concerning non-Jewish converts in Acts 15:29. Don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. Okay? Don't eat meat with the blood. Don't fornicate. Don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. Okay? There you go. That's it. Then he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Okay, so the words preceding and following this announcement have the force of a prophetic or authoritative announcement. Okay, listen to what's been said. The Spirit is the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of God, the prophetic Spirit sent by Christ to the churches. So it is a prophetic word. The New Testament way of saying, "Thus says the Lord." Okay, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Okay, to the one who conquers, overcomes. Okay, to the one who conquers, I will grant to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Okay, but conquering or overcoming, and you'll see that in the different translations. To the one who conquers, to the one who overcomes. Okay, different English translations of the same word. But understand what conquering means, what overcoming means in this context. Okay, it means dying. Jesus is presented as the ultimate conqueror, the ultimate overcomer. Okay? He died for his faith. And in dying for his faith, conquered death. So that image is carried forward into the life of the early church, which believed very strongly that to die a martyr's death, to die proclaiming your faith, guaranteed you a spot in eternity. No ambiguity, no question. You go straight to heaven, right? Into the presence of God. So to be faithful in Revelation is to be faithful unto death. Okay, faithful to the point of death. The one who conquers remains faithful to Christ in the end. It's hard for us to get our heads wrapped around that idea. But to die for your faith is to conquer. It's to win. It's not to die, not to lose. Okay, that's the notion. To the one who conquers, I will grant the tree of life. Now, that long introduction I gave you to Ephesus, this is where it comes back in. Remember the tree of Artemis? This is intended as a contrast. Which tree is better? Which tree is more beneficial? The tree of life in the garden, or the tree of Artemis, the groves of trees in the temple? Now, the tree of life is a reference to Genesis 2:9. We always focus on one tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Eden. But there were two trees, you see. Tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And once Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and fell from grace, to use a theological term, God said, no, you've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and brought death into the world and disobedience. Therefore, you are not worthy to eat from the tree of life and live forever. That's what Genesis 32 said. 3:22, lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat forever. Now again, that's an image coming out of Genesis. And so very long history of interpretation within the Israelite religion and then Judaism. So the tree of life is associated with eternal life. Okay? A reward for the righteous after the final judgment. We'll see that in Revelation 22:2. The tree of life shows up in the New Jerusalem, which is, if you will, right, the updated version of the Garden of Eden, the place where humanity dwells in harmony with God forever. So the use of this tree is not arbitrary, because tree of Artemis versus tree of life, who has a more solid promise of eternity, Artemis or Christ? Clearly Christ. Okay, clearly. It's intended as a counter symbol. Where do you find true sanctuary? Okay? With Artemis or with Christ? You go to the temple of Artemis to escape death. Okay? If you die in your faith, expressing your faith for Christ, you go to the paradise where death can't touch you. Okay? Paradise of God is Eden, is the New Jerusalem. Okay? the place where God will live with his people forever. So the promise, or the question, which one offers better protection or fulfillment? That's the question. The answer is obvious. The answer is obvious. That's Ephesus. Look at Smyrna. Smyrna still exists as a city in its ancient place, modern Izmir, about 35 miles north of Ephesus on the east coast of the Aegean Sea. And it was rebuilt in 290 BC as a model city in Asia. So they have a stadium, a library, a public theater. Smyrna's claim to fame was, they said, well, we are the birthplace of the poet Homer, 850 BC, thereabouts. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, in case that rings a bell. But within that city was a street called the Street of Gold that curved around Mount Pegasus, which rose about 500 feet above the harbor, and it looked like a huge necklace when viewed from a distance. And then there's an acropolis on top of Mount Pegasus that's called the Crown or Garland of Smyrna. So from a distance, you're looking toward this mountain and you see what appears to be a figure wearing a crown and a gold necklace. Okay? That crown and garland imagery is going to be important. Now, there were temples, of course, on either end of the Golden Street, a temple to Cybele, the mother of the gods and Imperial Rome's protector, and then to Zeus. Population of Smyrna, just a little bit less than the population of Ephesus, around 200,000 people. They built a temple there in honor of the Emperor Tiberius in 23 BC. For what reason? I don't know, but I guess it made sense to them. They had a strong allegiance to Rome. They had a large Jewish population that was openly hostile to Christians. Now, there are two reasons for that. One is the practical reason of competition. Because Christians would come along, they would claim to be Jews, but Jews with a new message. And so they were making inroads. Where are their first converts? Their first converts are among the Jews. So they are stealing sheep, if you will, to use a modern phrase. And so there's hostility toward them because they're hitting the Jewish communities where they hurt, in the pocketbook, taking members away. They're also going to be hostile because of the message that they're preaching. Okay? And some of that may very well have been that the Jews killed Jesus, which is nonsense. Some Jews had a hand in his death, but that blanket accusation doesn't work. Smyrna had a history, an important history spiritually. It was the site of the martyrdom of Bishop Polycarp of Smyrna. He was executed in his old age, burned at the stake, for refusing to acknowledge Caesar as Lord. A great legend around Polycarp of Smyrna. He went to his death, he's praising God, and they put him there at the stake, and they started burning him, and he's still singing, and legend has it that instead of the smell of burning flesh, there was the smell of freshly baked bread in the air. That's kind of cool. I think that's cool. So whether it's true or not doesn't matter. But the church was another church that was founded by Paul. So he spent time there. Another church that should be strong doctrinally and spiritually. Okay, just a few verses of Smyrna. The words of the first and the last, the one who died and came to life. Okay? Now, a church that's openly persecuted needs to hear a word from the one who is sovereign and victorious over life and death. I am the first and the last who died and came to life. So within that context, you have a divine statement, a statement of divine identity, first and the last, okay? One who is, who was, and is to come. The one who died and came to life, reminding believers that death was not the end for Jesus, and it's not the end for them as well. So the trials the church is facing are matters of life and death. Christians can be executed in this community. Then after identifying himself, Christ says, I know your tribulation and your poverty. Jesus is intimately acquainted with the struggles they're facing. They have not gone unnoticed. It would be natural from a human point of view for the church to be undergoing tribulation and persecution and be saying to themselves, where's Jesus? Okay? Your tribulation and your poverty. And sometimes that can be used to talk about spiritual poverty. Sometimes it can be used to talk about literal poverty. That could be the case here, because Christians who were ostracized, socially ostracized, would find it difficult to make a living. People would say, I'm not going to hire one of these Christians, so they can't work. They're not going to go to the marketplaces to buy food that's been sacrificed to idols. So what are they going to do? What are they going to do if people won't sell them food because they're Christians? And maybe they've even been victims of violence and looting, attacked because of their belief. Then in parentheses, but you are rich, okay? Rich spiritually. We'll contrast that to Laodicea. Laodicea claimed they were rich, but they were really poor spiritually. Okay. Then it says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not. We got to be careful with this, right? Slander is blasphemy. So accusations directed against Christians concerning their beliefs and practices. One of the rumors that circulated was that when Christians gathered for their communion, their agape feasts, right, talking about the body and blood of Jesus, that they actually ate flesh and blood. And one of the accusations was they slaughtered infants. They ate the flesh and blood of infants, and which is nonsense, but that was what went out there. So it's blasphemy because it violates, right? A Jew's going to go, oh, really? And that's blasphemous for the Jews. But other people are going to say, well, that's nasty, right? Now, Jewish hostility was directed at Christian worship of a Galilean peasant who died a criminal's death. Saying this was the Messiah. No way, right? The Messiah is not coming from Galilee, they're saying. Not a peasant, So they had a problem with that. And again, it's competition. The Christians are successfully going in and evangelizing and bringing people into the church, and so that's not good. So in a hostile environment where it's illegal to be a Christian, essentially, all they have to do is inform on their Christian neighbors, and they get arrested, maybe even put to death. In John 8:31-47, Christ declared that these Jews weren't really Jews at all because they don't believe what Jesus told them. Right? Again, we got to be careful about that. It's not a blanket indictment of all Jews. Okay? As many Jews came to faith in Christ, it's an indictment of this specific part of the Jewish community in Smyrna that's overtly hostile to Christians. And he calls them a synagogue of Satan. Again, that doesn't say what they are so much as it's saying what they're doing. And to oppose the gospel, to oppose the spread of the gospel and people coming to faith in Christ is to do the work of Satan. Okay? That's, again, not pejorative toward all Jews, but only, a synagogue, okay, of Satan. Not every synagogue, not every Jew, just some. So it's a harsh situation for them. But in verse 10, Jesus says, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Don't be afraid of what's coming. Clear dependence on Matthew 10:28. A word of encouragement to the faint-hearted, not to allow the threat of martyrdom to lead them to compromise their loyalty to Christ. Again, the issue of compromise. What difference does it make if once a year I burn a pinch of incense in front of the emperor and I know it doesn't mean anything? What difference does it make? Well, it makes a lot of difference. Because our actions matter and they're noticed by others, and they may not know the state of your heart. The devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. Now, the Roman authorities, right, are acting as agents of the devil by attacking those who swore allegiance to Christ instead of Caesar. Prisons are interesting in the ancient world. Okay? Sometimes just put in prison for a while to confine them as punishment, like we do today. Sometimes the place where they awaited execution. So the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. What about 10? What? So it's a round number. It's a number that means complete, right? Could indicate just a short length of time. May also indicate a prolonged but limited time. The point is being that this imprisonment will not last forever. And this is also something that you have to overcome. You have to endure. Okay? Even if at the end of that imprisonment, death awaits. The important thing is to stay faithful because something greater awaits you on the other side of death. The point is to stay faithful, no matter what the consequence. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Don't you love it? Okay? Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. The crown is the wreath of victory given to the winner of the games, the Stephanos. Okay? Not the royal crown, the diadema. Okay? Why? Well, because Smyrna was famous for its games. The winner of the games was crowned with a wreath of laurels, a crown of victory. Okay? Which crown means more? The crown of the victorious athlete or the crown of life given to the victorious Christian who is victorious in dying for his or her faith? That's the question. Okay. So the crown, right? They're thinking about the Acropolis on Mount Pegasus, thinking about the victory wreath given to the athlete, okay? Which crown is better? Which crown is more significant? And I love this. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. What does that mean? Will not be hurt. Strong double negative. Not in any way will be hurt, okay? And so this idea of, and what is hurt? What is the hurt of death, right? In the ancient world, the hurt of death is to no longer exist. Because many religions didn't really have a lot of use for the afterlife, okay? And only certain people shared in any kind of afterlife. For the Romans, from many of the Romans, only the very worthy were able to dwell with the gods in the heavens upon death. Everybody else went to hell. Crossed, the river Styx and went into Hades. But the one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. Now, that's a rabbinic term for the death of the wicked in the next life, right? In Revelation 20:14, we're going to see that in connection with the lake of fire. Now, what is it? Okay, what is it? Well, there are varying theories. One theory holds that it is annihilationism, that the second death is the annihilation that awaits those who fail the judgment. Okay? The second death can also be considered eternity spent in the lake of fire, eternity spent in punishment. Both images we find in Scripture. Okay? But the point is that death holds no power over the faithful because of their share in the first resurrection. The first resurrection is that moment of faith, right? Coming to faith in Jesus Christ and being given or guaranteed a share in the resurrection from the dead. Okay? So as we look at the whole counsel of Scripture, right? There's that first resurrection, if you will, where we come to faith in Christ, which means that death is a doorway, not a stopping place. But then the resurrection to eternal life, the judgment, where we are given new bodies to live forever in the presence of God. Okay? So that has given scholars fits. But the point here in both of these letters is to the churches to affirm what they're doing well, point out what they're doing wrong, and encourage them to continue to be faithful even in the face of violent persecution and threat of death. Okay? Because death holds no threat for those who are in Christ Jesus. That's the message. Okay? So Next time we'll pick up another couple, three of the letters. I expect to take 3 or 4 studies to get through this, but hopefully that gives you something to chew on for a week or so, and we will continue next time. If you want a copy of the written notes, you can contact me through YouTube, through Facebook, and give me your email address, and I'll send you a PDF of the typed up notes that I'm using to prepare these studies. But let's close with a word of prayer. Father, I do thank you and praise you for your word. I thank you, Lord, for this difficult book of Revelation, Lord, but a book that we can understand as we apply our minds to it and rely on the Holy Spirit. And so, Father, I pray that your Spirit would speak to our spirits, Lord, to encourage us as we read, Lord, that we might receive the blessing that this book promises. For I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so that's it for that. Hope you enjoyed it. Watch it again if you need to. We'll see you next time. God bless.